My name is Elisa, I'm 30 years old, a first lieutenant in the U.S. Marine Corps, my voice steadying despite the knot in my chest. As I stood on that stage, my heart pounding like a drum in my chest, I could feel my palms slick with sweat. At 30 years old and now a first lieutenant in the U.S. Marine Corps, the moment was supposed to be a pinnacle of pride. I had walked the path of rigorous training, sleepless nights, and endless sacrifices to earn my degree, and yet, all I could focus on was my dad sitting in the front row, arms crossed and a scowl plastered across his face. He had always doubted me, the little girl who dared to wear combat boots instead of heels, but I hadn't expected him to mock me publicly, especially not today, as I stood there with my diploma in hand. I took a deep breath, trying to steady the storm churning in my stomach, but all I could think was how desperately I wanted to prove him wrong. The moment the dean handed me my diploma, I could feel my father's incredulous eyes drilling into me, as if he were waiting for me to slip up. I had hoped he'd find some semblance of pride, but instead, he leaned over to whisper to my mother, his derisive chuckle cutting through the applause. "That's my daughter, the paper pusher." The laughter twisted like a knife, and I felt my face flush, the humiliation clawing at me. How could he so easily belittle everything I had fought for? Just feet away stood hundreds of people who respected my journey, and yet I felt utterly alone, the weight of his disdain heavier than my dress blues. Then it happened. I took a few tentative steps back, trying to find my footing, when suddenly a commanding voice erupted from the crowd. "General on deck." My heart skidded to a halt as I turned, instinctively snapping to attention, as did the rest of the graduates. The crowd parted, and in walked a line of Marines, each one standing tall and proud, their uniforms sharp and immaculate. In that moment, my dad's laughter was drowned out by the deep, resonant voices of my comrades as they saluted me. I caught my breath as they stood, a wall of solidarity, and for the first time that day, I didn't feel small. I felt powerful, surrounded by a brotherhood that transcended any words my father could muster. Each salute sent a wave of warmth through me, a reminder that while my father may never acknowledge my accomplishments, these men and women did, and more importantly, they understood the sacrifices that came with my role. I could feel the corners of my mouth creeping upward into a smile, while my heart raced with pride, battling the lingering sting of his mockery. I had chosen a path that very few women walked, and here, in this moment, I was no longer just Elisa, his daughter. I was a first lieutenant, a leader, a fierce Marine. As I scanned the faces of my fellow servicemen and women, I realized that no amount of belittling could erase the journey I had undertaken to get to this point. Standing there, beneath the bright lights and adorned in my dress blues, I embraced the truth, I had earned my place. I took a deep breath, letting the shame and doubt drift away, replaced by determination. This was my moment, my triumph against the odds. Before I go on, subscribe to the channel. Here, we tell the untold stories of military women, courage, sacrifice, and truth. Your support helps more voices like mine be heard. The sun beat down mercilessly on the parade ground, but the heat felt minuscule compared to the fire in my gut as I stood there, my hands stiff at my sides. I had spent nearly a decade striving to wear this uniform, culminating in today's ceremony, yet I couldn't shake the feeling of being an imposter as my classmates turned their heads, glancing between my father and me. The moment he'd mocked my aspirations, I felt the weight of every expectation, a heavy blanket threatening to suffocate me. "You're going to be a leader," he'd barked earlier that day. "In this family? Good luck." The laughter of my relatives still echoed in my ears, mingling with the sound of marching boots and brisk commands that normally filled me with pride. Instead, today, they felt like a mockery of my journey. I had dreamed of this day since I was a child. It wasn't just about the graduation, it was about proving everyone wrong, especially him. As the parade began, I stood before the rows of freshly graduated Marines like a sentinel, my heart racing in sync with the precise cadence of their steps. I could see the anticipation in their faces, their futures glinting with possibilities, yet my mind was caught in a tempest. How could I lead them when I still felt the sting of my father's ridicule? As I watched the sergeant call the formation to attention, I caught myself tightening my grip on the edge of my dress blues, as if it could hold my insecurities at bay. The ceremony progressed with military precision. I admired the way the colors were presented, the flag unfurling like a banner of hope and strength. Yet, all I could think about was how much I wanted my father to understand. I wanted him to see that I wasn't just wrapped up in the romanticism of soldiering. I was devoted, prepared to make sacrifices and lead my fellow Marines into whatever came next. As the speakers praised our dedication, my breath caught in my throat. This was it, a moment I thought would bring me validation, yet all I felt was an insatiable need to silence the laughter that still echoed in my mind. Then came the moment of truth. The Commandant of the Marine Corps stepped forward, and my heart sank. His presence was commanding, his words resonating through the crowd like a thunderclap. I could see a few of my friends, their faces twisted in excitement as they anticipated the moment they would officially become part of the Marine Corps. I felt a wave of emotion wash over me. This was supposed to be my victory too, my declaration of worth, yet I felt utterly invisible, overshadowed by my father's derision. How long could I carry this weight? Would I always be defined by what he thought of me? And then, in a moment I will never forget, the Commandant called my name to come forward. I stepped off the dais, my heart pounding in my ears. Would my father's laughter rise above the applause? Would he see the pride of my comrades? Just as I thought it couldn't get any worse, I squared my shoulders and clenched my fists, ready to prove him wrong one last time. Suddenly, the crowd shifted, and a shout rang out, "General on deck!" The distraction sent a ripple through the formation, and as I turned, I found myself standing before 150 proud Marines, all saluting me. The laughter faded, washed away by an unexpected swell of respect and camaraderie, filling the void where my father's scorn lingered. In that moment, I realized, I was there, I had earned my place, and for the first time, I believed it. As I stood on the edge of the parade ground, the sun beating down just as it had that day years ago, I felt a familiar knot twist in my stomach. My graduation was an event I had dreamt about for so long, cap and gown, my family in the crowd. But that day, underneath the excitement, there was a different current running through me. I could see my father's face, a mixture of pride and disbelief, a scrutinizing frown peering through the smiles he'd plastered on for show. It wasn't until his voice broke through the noise of the crowd, mocking my dreams, that the tension in my chest tightened into something uncivilized. It was the first time I truly felt the impact of my choice to join the Marine Corps, an unyielding reminder that no matter my achievements, in my father's eyes, I was still just the girl from that small town. The memory flooded back so vividly that I could almost hear him chuckling under his breath when I wore my uniform for the first time. A soldier? Really? What's next, a bodybuilder, he had teased, laughter laced with disbelief. At that moment, standing in front of family and friends, I had wanted nothing more than to believe in the worthiness of my journey. But instead, his laughter cut through the air, reminding me of every time I'd tried to prove myself, of every time he'd dismissed my aspirations. It felt as if the weight of his expectations pressed on my shoulders again, heavy and suffocating. At that moment, I wasn't just a graduate, I was a daughter searching for approval in a world that seemed so much bigger than my father's gruff words. Then came the salutes. As the ranks of Marines stood, a solid wall of honor and camaraderie, the sound of "General on deck" echoed through the air, drawing me back to the present. My heart stilled as I looked at those men and women, standing at attention like a fortress of shared dreams and unyielding respect. It was a stark contrast to my father's jeers, a visceral reminder that outside of that small-town judgment, there were people who understood what it meant to serve, to sacrifice, to belong. In their unwavering loyalty, I found a glimmer of solace, a flicker of validation that I had been seeking for so long. Unlike my father's dismissive laughter, their salutes offered recognition, respect that bound us in a way I hadn't anticipated. But the comfort was fleeting. As I stood there, enveloped by their camaraderie, the old wounds reopened, a mix of pride and inadequacy swirling within me. I thought about the years of training, the sweat and tears, and the sacrifices I made to wear this uniform. Yet, a part of me wondered if it would ever be enough. Would I ever be able to step fully into this identity without the weight of his mockery trailing like a shadow? It felt almost contradictory, fighting alongside a brotherhood while still grappling with my own self-worth, squaring off against the ridicule that had chased me from childhood to adulthood. The Marines had saved me in so many ways, yet the battle for my father's approval still lingered, a ghost that refused to let me go. As I heard the final salute followed by a resounding silence stretching across the parade ground, I took a deep breath and reminded myself that I was no longer just that girl he scrutinized. I was a first lieutenant, a Marine, and I had earned every ounce of respect that came with it. I had served honorably and stood tall among those who would give their lives for this country and each other. Yet, even with that knowledge anchoring me, the remnants of my father's laughter echoed deep within. My journey was complex, one forged in both the darkness of disappointment and the light of newfound purpose. And while I would never fully escape my past, maybe, just maybe, I could step into the future with a strength of my own. I stood at the edge of the yard, memories flooding back like the tide in the ocean I had always loved. Our house, with its peeling blue paint and the creaky wooden porch, had witnessed so many moments, some happy, others painful. I could still see myself as a child, a little girl with wild curls and dreams of adventure, racing around in my father's backyard while he tended to his grill, tossing burgers as if they were duty-bound to sizzle. But the laughter that echoed in those early days eventually faded, buried beneath layers of disapproval and unmet expectations. It's strange how time can stitch together moments of joy with threads of resentment, isn't it? I remember that summer evening in particular, when I mustered the courage to tell my dad about my aspirations, to join the Marine Corps. He laughed, that deep, booming laugh that could fill a whole room. You? A Marine? You'd have to learn how to climb trees first, he joked. My cheeks burned, and for a moment, I stood frozen, the shadow of his skepticism looming over me. I had been prepared for some teasing, sure, but not the kind that made my heart plummet. It was as if he had said I was too weak, too fragile to take on an endeavor that demanded strength of spirit and resilience. It wasn't just the laughter, it was the dismissal, a public spectacle for his friends who stood by, chuckling and nodding. I'd felt smaller than I ever had, my dreams suddenly unworthy of pursuit. As I grew older, I found myself drawn away from that boyish laughter and into a world where I could shape my narrative. I excelled academically, joining clubs that challenged me and pushed me further than I'd ever imagined. In those late-night study sessions, surrounded by books and ambition, I trained myself to be more than just the girl my father mocked. I craved respect, the kind that seemed to elude me at home. It was during one of those pivotal moments that I decided, fiercely and without hesitation, that I would become a Marine. It felt like finally claiming my identity, like planting a flag on territory that had long been contested. Training was grueling. Every drill sergeant's bark and every ounce of sweat was a step away from the girl who hid from laughter, away from the image my father had created. I pulled from a deep well of determination, each day reinforcing my resolve. I knew I would walk across that graduation stage, but I didn't picture him in the audience. I imagined myself surrounded by my fellow warriors, each person standing not in judgment but in solidarity. I wanted validation from them, my brothers and sisters in arms who understood sacrifice and drive. I wanted to be part of something that demanded respect, something that would silence the laughter I'd always dreaded. And then came that day, my graduation. When I stepped into the sunlight, the weight of my uniform felt comforting against my skin. But just as I began to feel proud, I caught a glimpse of my father in the crowd, arms crossed, with that familiar smirk plastered on his face. Everything I had fought for threatened to unravel as his laughter echoed again in my head. But then, as if orchestrated by fate, a wave of Marines stood at attention, and the words "General on deck" rang through the air. In that moment, even amidst the laughter, I felt the swell of pride rise with the unity around me. My chest surged, no longer just the girl in the yard but a first lieutenant, respected and recognized. My dreams, once seen as laughable, now commanded the strength of my brothers and sisters beside me. Nothing could have prepared me for the moment I walked across that stage. As my name echoed through the auditorium, every fiber of my being felt like it was pulsating with the weight of unfulfilled expectations. I had spent 4 long years pouring my heart and soul into my studies, battling through sleepless nights and relentless challenges. And then there was my dad, sitting near the back, arms crossed, his eyes barely hiding the skepticism he harbored about my ability to thrive outside the confines of a classroom. When he laughed at my dream of becoming a Marine, it felt like I was trying to climb a mountain, and he was standing at the base, tossing rocks to scatter my footing. As I took a deep breath, I focused on the moment I had been building towards for so long. My graduation. The culmination of my hard work, and yet, I could still feel my dad's derisive laughter lingering in my ears. I wasn't just walking that stage for me, I was walking it for all the little girls who looked up to their dads, hoping for validation, hoping for a nod of pride. But instead, I had his words, that I wouldn't measure up, that I wouldn't last in the Marines, echoing in my mind. I was determined to show him, but more importantly, I wanted to prove to myself that I was worthy of the uniform I dreamed of wearing. The applause faded as I moved away from the podium, and I could feel the eyes of my classmates searching the crowd, looking for familiar faces. I spotted a few who had already accepted their positions, some in law, others in medicine, and I felt a familiar sting of jealousy but also a flicker of determination. They had their paths laid out, but mine was an uncertain road filled with obstacles and challenges. I wanted them to see me as more than just another graduate. I wanted to embody strength and resilience, to rise above any doubts, especially those planted by my father. With every step, I reaffirmed my commitment to myself, vowing that I would prove my worth by donning my dress blues and earning my place. Later that day, as I stood alongside my fellow graduates, the moment I had been waiting for arrived. Surrounded by the camaraderie of the Marine Corps, I witnessed the sound of boots hitting the ground in unison, and my heart raced. The commanding officer called out, "General on deck." The proud response from the Marines before me was a beautiful cacophony of discipline and respect. My body tingled at the sight of their sharp uniforms and the resolute stares punctuating the room. It was a stark reminder that I was about to join a legacy, a force greater than myself, where my worth wouldn't be questioned, where it would be measured by my actions, not by someone else's doubts. In that moment, as I were swept up in the energy of my peers, all I could think was that this was just the beginning. I could finally carve my path through this brotherhood, this sisterhood. I felt the weight of my past lift, slowly but surely, as I found solace in the realization that I was no longer defined by my father's laughter or his dismissals. The journey ahead would be steep, but I was ready to face it, head held high. I would carry the courage of those who had come before me and embody the values of honor, courage, and commitment. I would prove my worth, not just to my father, but to every single Marine who stood before me that day. The day my father mocked me at my graduation is one I can never forget. I stood there, clad in my crisp uniform, the weight of my achievements pressing heavily on my shoulders. My peers were smiling, eyes gleaming with the promise of futures filled with duty, honor, and pride. Yet, amidst the cheers and applause, I heard my father's voice cutting through the air like a knife. "First Lieutenant? You? Come on, Elisa. Who are you trying to impress?" The laughter erupted from some family members, but I remember feeling the heat rising in my cheeks as embarrassment washed over me. His words, meant to be humorous, felt like daggers. I had fought long and hard to earn that title, and in that moment, it all felt diminished by his sarcasm. But standing on that stage, I made a choice. I wouldn't let his words define me. I could feel the weight of disappointment in my chest, but I recognized it for what it was, fuel. Even at that moment, I began to understand that my journey in the Marine Corps wasn't just about fitting into a mold set by someone else's expectations, especially not my father's. I locked eyes with other graduates, their faces mirroring my determination, and I drew strength from their resolve. I vowed that I would not only prove him wrong but also show myself that I was worthy of the title I had earned. I just had to keep pushing forward. Fast forward to today, standing in front of a battalion of Marines, I can hardly recognize the woman I was back then. I've fought through grueling training, deployments that stretched me to my limits, and the constant battle of balancing my femininity with the fierce warrior I've become. Each time I faced a challenge, I thought back to that graduation moment. I knew the ridicule would only light a fire within me, one that would drive me to succeed, to command respect on and off the battlefield. Now, as I look at the young faces before me, I see not just soldiers, but a future that I wanted to shape and inspire. Today was different, though. As I stepped into the formation, I caught a glimpse of my father's face among the crowd. His expression was shadowed, perhaps a reflection of the burdens he carried. But I didn't feel anger or resentment anymore, I felt pity. He'd missed out on the chance to see me grow, to embrace the powerful woman I had become. I wasn't the child he'd wanted to mold, I had forged my own path. When I called for the formation to stand, I felt a surge of pride as my voice carried across the field. 150 Marines, stand and salute. The response was immediate and powerful, like an electric current surging through the air, and it almost made me giddy. General on deck. The roar of the salute reverberated in my chest as I stood at attention. For a moment, the world around me faded, and the cheers morphed into a symphony of validation. I felt respected, recognized, home. The accolades felt hollow after my father's mockery, yet this moment was different. This was real, this was my family now. I had fought to belong in this world, and I had earned every ounce of respect standing before me. As I scanned the faces of my Marines, I saw pride reflected back at me, and for the first time, I felt I could leave my father's perception in the past. In the end, as the applause echoed, I realized that overcoming wasn't just about proving anyone wrong, it was about embracing who I was meant to be. I wore my uniform not just as a barrier against the world but as a true representation of my journey, my strength. My father may never understand the woman I had become, but that was no longer my burden to bear. I am First Lieutenant Elisa, and I am proud, not just of my title, but of the path I fought so relentlessly to carve. I remember standing at the edge of the parade field, heart racing, clutching my diploma as my name echoed through the air. In the distance, I could see my dad, his arms crossed, a smirk already forming on his lips. "What are you going to do with that?" I could almost hear him say, his voice dripping with sarcasm, just as it always had. That day was supposed to be about celebrating my achievements, the culmination of years of hard work, but in his eyes, I was still just his daughter who hadn't quite met his expectations. It hurt, but it also fueled a fire within me. I wanted to prove him wrong, not just to him, but to myself. As I progressed through my training, I found that persistence became my greatest ally. Days on the range were long and grueling, the sun pouring down while we perfected our marksmanship under the watchful gaze of our instructors. I fell more times than I could count, both physically and mentally, as frustration threatened to drown me. I remember gripping my rifle, tears stinging my eyes as I fumbled during a live-fire exercise. But every time, I picked myself up, fueled by the memory of my dad's dismissive laugh. I wasn't just doing it for the badge, I was doing it for the little girl inside me who wanted to shine, to be seen. Time passed, and the more I faced challenges, the more I transformed. I learned to embrace every setback as a lesson in resilience. Each morning, as I laced up my combat boots, I reminded myself that the more grit I showed, the more power I could wield, not just in my career but in my life. I found camaraderie within my unit that filled the void my father's expectations had carved. Together, we pushed through every obstacle, and I watched my fellow Marines blossom alongside me. Beneath the uniform, we were individuals with dreams, hopes, and scars. Over time, I began to understand that growth doesn't always look like success, sometimes it's buried under layers of struggle. When I earned my first promotion to first lieutenant, I felt the weight of pride settle over me like a heavy mantle. I stood before my peers, my heart swelling as I delivered my acceptance speech. I thought about my dad and his derisive comments. I knew moments like this were supposed to be about family, but I had come to realize that my family was not just determined by blood. These Marines at my side had become my family, my support network, and they recognized my worth in a way I had always craved from my dad. The room was filled with cheers, but in my mind's eye, I could still see those moments of doubt creeping in. My drive to prove myself had transformed from a desperate need for validation to an unwavering commitment to serve. It wasn't until that day during the ceremony when I felt a shift. As I stepped forward to address a battalion of Marines, the air electric with anticipation, there was a moment when I thought of my dad again, only this time, it was with a sense of liberation. They stood at attention, their faces resolute and respectful as they shouted, "General on deck." Their salute felt like a warm embrace, and I could finally acknowledge that I didn't need my father's approval. I had achieved something truly significant on my own terms. I had finally found my place, my identity, and it was more than enough. The sun was setting behind the horizon as I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the uniform hanging in the closet. It was crisp and perfectly pressed, the insignia on my collar gleaming with authority. Yet, all the meaning it held felt like a weight pressing down on me, a reminder of everything I had lost. I remembered my dad's mocking voice at my graduation, how he dismissed my achievements as if they were trivial. The harshness of his words lingered in my mind, a bitter echo of disappointment that somehow overshadowed the pride I should have felt in that moment. It gnawed at me, taunting my resolve, making the victories I fought so hard for feel like hollow shells. I had always envisioned that day differently. In my mind, I saw him standing tall among the crowd, chest puffed out with pride, his eyes gleaming with tears. I imagined a warm embrace, a father's praise that would wash away the years of doubt and judgment. Instead, I was met with derision, his laughter mingling with the crowd's applause as I accepted my diploma. It had stung deeper than I could have ever anticipated, but that pain was nothing compared to the overwhelming sense of loss that I felt now. My father had never accepted me for who I was, and that realization was a wound that refused to heal. As I looked down at the dog tags resting on my dresser, I couldn't help but think of my brother, Joey. He was the one person who always understood me, who cheered the loudest during my first run in boots or when I earned my stripes. He had wanted to join the Corps too but never got the chance. His life had been cut short before he even had the opportunity to step into a recruiter's office. Sometimes, I envisioned him by my side, his laughter and warmth lighting up the darkest days. It was hard to wrap my head around the fact that every time I donned my uniform, I was living the dream we both shared, yet he was absent, fading like a ghost from my life. The thought of Joey stirred a deeper resolve in me, reminding me that I had a purpose. I believed I was still carrying him along, pushing through the pain and disappointment to honor his memory. Each time I saluted a superior, I did it for him, imagining his face beaming back at me. "You got this, Elisa," I would hear him whisper, his unwavering belief in me echoing in the silence of my empty room. The weight of my father's derision became easier to bear knowing that I was not just fighting for my dreams, but for the dreams of a young man who had been silenced too soon. But the struggle was relentless. There were nights when the shadows crept in, when the loneliness and grief wrapped around me like an old blanket, suffocating and familiar. I'd find myself staring into the darkness, wrestling with the thoughts of what could have been, the moments I wished I could share with Joey. I often questioned whether I was worthy of this life, and if my victories mattered in the grand scheme of things. The conflict raged within me, battling against my commitment to the Corps and the desire to be a beacon of honor for my brother. Deep down, I knew this fight was mine alone, yet it felt burdened by the weight of my family's expectations, by the harsh words of a father who had never seen me for who I truly was. As I stood on the parade deck, the salty breeze felt like an old friend. It rustled my dress uniform just enough to remind me of the weight I carried, not just the ribbons and insignia, but the expectations and dreams that accompanied them. The rows of Marines, their faces serious but full of unspoken camaraderie, seemed to pulse with life, a collective heartbeat of dedication. I took a deep breath, my chest swelling with pride mixed with a hint of anxiety. Today was a day of recognition, not just for me, but for all of us who had endured the long nights and relentless drills. Looking at my fellow officers, I spotted Daisy, who had been with me since boot camp. We had shared countless moments of doubt and triumph, her laughter often breaking the tension during our hardest workouts. Nearby stood Carpenter, a quiet strategist, his eyes flicking between the podium and the formation. We weren't just colleagues, we were family forged in the fires of adversity and mutual respect. Today, that bond felt more palpable than ever. As I made my way to the front, I could feel their gazes encouraging me, reminding me that I was not just representing myself, but all of us who had worked relentlessly to reach this moment. The microphone crackled as I adjusted it, but the momentary feedback was drowned out by the rush of memories that flooded in, shared victories, the sound of boots on the ground during early morning runs, the laughter around the mess hall tables. I remember how easy it was to feel invisible amidst the sea of testosterone, often dismissed by those who only saw my gender rather than my dedication. But here, under the watchful eyes of my comrades, Marines who recognized my strength and resolve, there was no room for doubt. The parade ground was not only a place of ceremony, but a testament to our shared journey, our struggles, and the triumph we fought for together. As I began my speech, I couldn't help but feel the heat of my father's mockery lingering like an unwelcome shadow. But I chose to bury that resentment beneath layers of determination and pride. The Marines in front of me weren't just an audience, they were my compatriots. I spoke from the heart, acknowledging the doubts that had been cast upon me, not just by my father but by societal expectations of what it meant to be a female leader in this field. Each word was a rallying cry, a reminder that we had all risen above, that the respect we earned was not handed to us, but forged in the relentless pursuit of excellence. When I concluded, the applause surged like a wave, washing over me and banishing any remnants of self-doubt. And then, as if on cue, 1,000 memories collided in that singular moment when, from the back of the formation, the command rang out. "General on deck." As Marines stood in unison, saluting, I felt a wellspring of emotions rise within me. In that brief instant, I was no longer just Elisa, the daughter who had struggled for her father's approval. I was a first lieutenant, a member of the United States Marine Corps, standing shoulder to shoulder with warriors who saw me not just as an equal, but as their leader. The recognition of my peers, my family in uniform, was the kind of validation I had always sought, the kind that made every sacrifice worth it. I stood there, the echoes of laughter from my father still stinging in my ears as I faced the assembled Marines, their backs straight and faces set in solemn respect. The weight of my uniform felt heavier than usual, a reminder of the expectations I had fought so hard to meet. The cheers and clapping from the crowd faded into the background, and I felt an unsettling mix of pride and frustration swell up inside me. All I had wanted was a moment where I could prove my worth, to show him, and everyone else, that I was more than just his daughter. I wanted to make a mark, not just on my graduation day but on the world. But there he was, my father, in the front row with a smirk that twisted my gut. His dismissive comments, meant to be lighthearted, felt like daggers. "You? A Marine? Don't forget to wear your pink beret," he'd laughed, and even now I could see his eyes dancing with amusement, as if I was a punchline in some private joke. It was supposed to be a celebration, but all I could think of was how his ridicule echoed in my mind, taunting me. Did he think I wasn't tough enough, that I didn't belong in this world? I had proven myself time and time again, not just through the sweat and blood poured into training but through every single moment I've stood firm against doubt, including my own. As the ceremony continued, I felt a fire ignite within me, an urge to confront him, to challenge him to see the reality of my life. The Marines around me had endured hardships and triumphs similar to mine. They'd fought battles, not just against our enemies but against their own doubts and the doubts of others. Yet here I was, ready to put everything on the line in the face of the very person who should have been my greatest supporter. I needed to talk to him afterward, to let him understand that I was done hiding from his judgment, from the lingering shadows of his mockery. I was a first lieutenant, not his little girl anymore. The moment arrived, and I found myself marching towards him, my heart racing. The rigorous discipline I had ingrained during my training propelled me forward. I needed to harness that military resolve and confront the very person who had always been my toughest critic. "Dad," I started, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside me. He paused, his expression shifting from amusement to confusion, and I seized that moment. "You don't get to dismiss my accomplishments. I've fought for this title, I've sacrificed for it. I need you to see me for who I am now, not just as your daughter." The tension hung in the air, a palpable silence that seemed to stretch into eternity. I had laid it all out there, bearing my soul in a way that felt terrifying yet liberating. My father's face remained neutral, but I could see the flicker of realization in his eyes. He'd never really understood what it meant to walk this path, and for the first time, I hoped he might find the courage to step outside his own shadow. No longer could I tolerate the echoes of doubt. It was time for clarity, for acknowledgement, for respect. I had earned my place among these Marines, and I wouldn't allow his laughter to undermine that ever again. My heart raced as I stood at the front of the auditorium, drenched in the mixed sense of sweat and anticipation, the weight of my uniform pressing down on me. It was supposed to be a proud moment, my graduation from officer training, a milestone I had worked tirelessly to achieve. But instead of feeling buoyed by the excitement of obtaining my commission, I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach as I recalled my father's scornful laughter earlier that day. "You think you can lead men in combat? You're too soft, Elisa," he had sneered. I could still hear his voice echoing in my head, drowning out the cheers of my peers and the powerful sentiments of those who believed in me. I tried to focus on the moment, on the sea of uniforms around me, but I felt so small. The pride I wanted to exude felt suffocated by his words. As my fellow graduates received their commissions, I caught sight of my mother in the crowd, her eyes shimmering with tears of joy. Despite my father's remarks, she stood resolutely, a beacon of support amidst the mixed emotions swirling in my mind. It pained me to know that my father wouldn't appreciate the full scope of my accomplishments, that he would instead choose to diminish my achievements based on his narrow views of strength and capability. The ceremony progressed, and then it happened. As the commanding officer called out, "General on deck," the entire auditorium fell silent, eyes snapping to the entrance where a figure stood, a seasoned Marine, impossibly tall and commanding. His presence alone seemed to fill the room with a force that made my heart swell with respect. All at once, the audience stood, and I felt the surge of pride not just for myself but for every woman and man who'd fought to be here today. It was a singular moment of unity and recognition. The Marines standing at attention ignited a fire in me, one that drowned out my father's derision and lit up every ounce of pride I had in my chosen path. As the general began to address the graduates, I leaned forward, clinging to every word. He spoke of leadership, sacrifice, and resilience, qualities that defined not only a Marine but a leader. The emotion in his voice filled me, echoing the very essence of why I had enlisted in the first place. I sought to prove that I could stand shoulder to shoulder with the best, that my gender did not define my worth, nor did it limit my ability to rise to the occasion. I felt electrified as he emphasized that it was the heart and spirit that made a Marine, not just strength. His words became a balm, a counter to the harshness I had faced in my own family. In that moment, surrounded by my fellow officers and the camaraderie we shared, I realized that this was my family now. I was not just battling my father's expectations, I was embracing every Marine's story and struggle that had come before me. In that solidarity, I understood the weight of my title, the significance of wearing this uniform. It was an affirmation that I belonged here, that despite the naysayers, I was capable of becoming the leader I had always aspired to be. My journey had only just begun, but with every salute from the Marines around me, I felt their acknowledgement, their belief, washing away the sting of mockery. I stood tall that day, and for the first time, I felt my father's shadow recede, replaced instead by the strength of a sisterhood forged in service and sacrifice. As I stand at the very edge of this new chapter, a bittersweet taste lingers in my mouth. Graduation day was supposed to be a celebration, a moment to bask in the pride of the sacrifices I've made and the challenges I've overcome. Instead, I found myself flinching at my dad's mocking tone, the laughter of a crowd that once made me feel small rattling in my ears. But now, as I reflect on that day, the sting of his words no longer haunts me. I've come to realize that I don't need his approval or that of anyone else who questioned my worth. I carved my own path, and it is one lined with hard-fought achievements that can never be taken away. The Marines standing at attention, saluting me with the highest respect, were a stark reminder of how far I've come and the strength I possess. Their disciplined presence drowned out the noise of ridicule. I stood before them, not just a daughter longing for her father's approval, but a leader in my own right. The weight of their salute felt like a shield, protecting me from the years of doubt and criticism that had plagued my mind. In that moment, I felt the unity of my fellow Marines, each one a testament to the fact that real strength comes from within, not from the fleeting validation of those around us. With every step I had taken on my journey, I shed layers of self-doubt and insecurity. I embraced the fear and transformed it into resolve. The mockery didn't break me, it fueled me. I learned to savor my victories and share them with those who truly understand the sacrifices made. I saw the faces of my recruits, wide-eyed and eager to learn, and I knew that my journey was about more than just me. It was about paving a way for others, about showing them that despite the naysayers, they can rise, too. My heart swelled with pride as I understood the impact of my own story, a narrative of resilience and determination. Now, I stand not just as a soldier, but as a woman who has taken her rightful place in a world that sometimes feels too small for those who dare to dream. I have accepted that the echoes of my father's laughter may always linger in the background, but they no longer hold power over me. For every time I hear it, I remind myself of the Marines who cheered for me, whose respect I earned through my hard work and unwavering spirit. This realization is liberating. I am no longer a girl seeking validation. I am a woman, a leader, and a proud first lieutenant who stands tall and commands respect. As I look out at the horizon, the sun setting against the backdrop of the ocean, I see a reflection of my journey. The light dances on the water's surface, illuminating the path ahead, reminding me that I am the captain of my ship. My past may have shaped me, but it does not define me. The waves crash gently against the shore, and with each crest, I am reminded that life is full of ebbs and flows. I am ready to embrace whatever comes next, knowing that I have already triumphed over the storms. I am no longer searching for approval, I am the beacon of strength that I always knew I could be. If you stayed with me until the end, thank you. Please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments which city you're watching from.